They broke into my land, stole $38,000 worth of timber, and then had the nerve to accuse me of theft. You probably think that's a joke, or maybe a plot from some crime thriller. But this is 100% real. This happened to me. Let me take you back. I own a chunk of rural land. Quiet, forested, mine. I bought it outright years ago. No mortgage, just sweat, savings, and pride. And I've always kept to myself. I'm not part of any neighborhood or homeowners association. In fact, the HOA nearby has no legal power over my land. We're on different plots, and I made sure of that when I bought it. But that didn't stop them. Over the years, the HOA started creeping, enforcing more rules, pushing boundaries, and acting like kings of the whole valley. I ignored them, until one day, I couldn't. I had cut down a number of mature trees on my own property, legally, responsibly, and with plans to sell the timber. I stacked those logs neatly at the edge of the property for pickup. A few days later, they were gone. Confused, I searched the area. Nothing, no tracks, no notes. And then it happened. I got a letter from the HOA accusing me of stealing protected timber. They claimed they owned the logs and were confiscating them. I couldn't believe it. They didn't ask. They didn't warn. They just took, trespassed, stole, lied. And now they were trying to frame me. That was the moment I knew I had no choice but to fight. What followed was one of the most exhausting, frustrating, and eye-opening legal battles I've ever endured. I had to learn about property law, gather evidence, fight accusations, and protect my name and my land. But in the end, I took them to court and won. In this video, I'll walk you through everything, every shady move they pulled, every legal hurdle I faced, and the final glorious moment when the judge ruled in my favor. If you've ever dealt with an overreaching HOA, this story is for you. Before the drama unfolded, life on my property was everything I had worked for. Peaceful, quiet, mine. I bought the land almost a decade ago, after years of saving, no loans, just me, a small cabin, and a thick patch of trees that felt like home. It wasn't a big place, but it was perfect. I had a driveway carved in, built my own storage shed, and was working toward building a proper workshop on the back half. Everything was within my control. And that was the way I liked it. The land itself sat on the edge of a growing suburban development. Neat rows of houses, clean sidewalks, and a very involved homeowners association. That's where the trouble began. From the start, I made sure my land was zoned rural residential. No HOA involvement. I wasn't part of their neighborhood, their contracts, their fees, or their rules. I even had my lawyer double-check it before I signed the deed. It was crystal clear. My land was autonomous. But that didn't stop the HOA from acting like they ruled over me. Their development was directly down the road from mine. The people there followed strict regulations: house colors, lawn heights, mailbox designs. Everything had a rule. That was fine. It wasn't my business. But I could feel the tension every time I passed their gate, like I was some wild outsider living without standards. At first, it was annoying, but tolerable. A few passive-aggressive notes on my truck. Side eyes from their board members. One woman came over once, asking if I could tidy up my stacked woodpile because it's visible from the street. I laughed and said no. But then the complaints escalated. They reported me to the county over noise, which was odd considering I live alone and don't throw parties. They claimed my shed violated local building codes. They tried to say my burn pile, which was legal and cleared, was a fire risk to their homes. Every time they complained, some inspector would show up, And every time, I'd show my permits, my records, and send them away with nothing. Then came the notice it was winter, and I was preparing to harvest some trees I had been managing for years. That's when I got a letter. Outstanding dues owed. From the HOA, I laughed at first. I thought it was a mistake. But the letter included a claim that my parcel had been retroactively added to the HOA's governing boundaries via a revision. That was the first time I realized this wasn't just busybodies with too much free time. This was a power move. I responded immediately, sent a packet of documents, title deeds, legal plats, original zoning paperwork, letters from the county, all of it proving, beyond a doubt, that my property was independent. The board went quiet. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. What I didn't know was that the HOA wasn't just annoyed by my independence. They were watching something else. My trees. On the back third of my land were dozens of mature hardwoods, maple, oak, walnut. I had spent years maintaining them, pruning, planning, and finally got them ready for harvest. I marked them for felling and stacked the first batch near the edge of my property. What I didn't realize is that the HOA had begun photographing my logs. I would later find out they even had discussions in their meetings about unauthorized forestry and environmental damage. They painted me as some outlaw clearing protected land, even though I had full legal right and documentation for sustainable harvest. At one point, one of their board members tried to speak to me at a gas station in town. He made some odd comment like, "You should really reconsider what you're doing with those trees. They're part of the local aesthetic." I brushed him off. That was the moment it started clicking. This wasn't about noise or fire safety or sheds. This was about those logs. They saw value. They saw something they thought they could take. And behind the HOA's rules and regulations, they were planning something I never would have imagined possible from a neighborhood association. This wasn't about community. It was about greed. Soon, they'd make their move. And when they did, everything I thought I understood about property rights, boundaries, and justice would be put to the ultimate test. I remember the exact day I realized the logs were gone. It was a cold morning. Frost on the ground, breath fogging up in the air. I had just brewed a pot of coffee and planned to walk the lot to inspect the stacked timber. I had spent weeks harvesting them. Each log had been carefully measured, cut, and arranged in a specific way. They were seasoned hardwood, and I had a buyer lined up, a small mill that offered a fair price and handled their own transport. It was all set. When I turned the corner of the shed and reached the edge of the property line, my heart sank. The logs were gone, not misplaced, not moved, gone, every single one of them. Over $38,000 worth of timber vanished. No tire tracks, no sign of a truck, nothing. My first instinct was to call the mill. Maybe they had come early, but they confirmed they hadn't sent anyone yet. They were still waiting on my confirmation call. Next, I called the sheriff's office to report a theft. I filed a report, walked an officer through the property, explained what had happened. He was professional but skeptical. There was no evidence, no cameras, no witnesses, just me, a piece of land, and a missing stack of logs. The officer asked if I had any enemies. I laughed. "Only the HOA," I said, half joking. That's when things started getting weird. 2 days after the report, I received a formal letter, certified mail, from the HOA. It read like something out of a movie. They claimed that a large quantity of community-managed natural resources had been illegally taken and subsequently recovered. They claimed they had repossessed the logs as protected community assets. I stared at the letter in disbelief. They had just admitted it. They took them. Not only that, They claimed I was the thief. They accused me of stealing from the community forest. The community forest, my trees on my land, harvested with proper documentation. They now claimed that this was somehow shared property. It was outrageous and terrifying. They even attached a bill, for the cost of recovery, which included truck rental, contractor fees, and storage. It totaled over $4,000. They were demanding payment. That's when I knew. This was serious. They weren't playing games anymore. I immediately called a lawyer. Over the next few days, we collected everything: satellite imagery, old zoning records, forestry permits, even soil reports. Anything that could prove those trees were on my property, not theirs. But while we were preparing our case, the HOA went public. They sent out newsletters to the entire neighborhood calling me a danger to community resources and an unauthorized logger. They held a special board meeting, which I was not invited to, and used it to vote on banning me from trespassing on HOA land, even though I had never stepped foot past my own fence. This was no longer just a dispute, it was a smear campaign. And worst of all, some people believed them. Neighbors started avoiding me at the store. One man called me a tree thief under his breath as I passed by. Another told my buyer, the mill, that I was in legal trouble and that the timber was contaminated by litigation. That buyer backed out. The HOA wasn't just stealing from me anymore. They were poisoning everything around me: my reputation, my relationships, my income. I received a second letter, this one threatening to press charges. They cited local statutes, referenced conservation laws they clearly didn't understand, and accused me of logging protected wetlands. My lawyer and I reviewed the claims. They were laughable, false on every level. But we both knew the damage wasn't just in the legal paperwork. It was in the perception. And perception, in small communities, spreads like wildfire. At one point, the HOA even tried to involve a local news blog. A small write-up went out online titled, "Unauthorized Logging Raises Alarm in Quiet Community." My name wasn't in it, but the description was unmistakable. Photos were included. Photos of my logs, taken from my land. I was furious. But more than that, I was resolved. This wasn't going to be some behind-the-scenes resolution. We had to go to court. Not just to get the logs back. They'd already been moved, maybe even sold. But to clear my name, to get justice, and to stop this HOA from doing it to someone else. I wasn't just fighting for my trees anymore. I was fighting for my dignity, my independence, and every landowner who's ever had to deal with power-hungry bureaucrats who think a clipboard gives them control. Once I made it clear I was taking legal action, the HOA doubled down. They didn't apologize. They didn't back off. Instead, they escalated, publicly and legally. It started with a cease and desist letter. They claimed I was harassing the board by interfering with community operations. Apparently, the simple act of calling them out and hiring a lawyer was now considered harassment. Then they filed a formal complaint with the county. They alleged that I had illegally harvested trees from shared greenbelt land that, according to them, included parts of my property. They attached a map that had clearly been altered. Hand-drawn boundary lines stretching well into my acreage, backed by nothing but their own board's interpretation of an outdated plat. My lawyer and I couldn't believe it. We responded with official zoning maps, GIS data, and an affidavit from the original surveyor who had helped me during my purchase. Still, the HOA wouldn't budge. They insisted the logs belonged to the community, and even suggested that removing them without approval was a form of ecological vandalism. Then came the worst blow yet. They filed a police report. The report accused me of theft, criminal mischief, and destruction of protected land. I was actually visited by deputies who asked to inspect the area. They were polite, professional, and, thankfully, a bit skeptical of the HOA's claims. But the fact that I was now officially under investigation for stealing my own property, that hit hard. The HOA had weaponized the system. Their goal wasn't truth or justice, it was to bury me in paperwork, stress, and doubt. They wanted to make my life so difficult I'd just give up. But they underestimated how far I was willing to go to defend what was mine. My attorney began building a countersuit for defamation, theft, trespassing, and abuse of process. We compiled every letter, every false claim, and every public statement they'd made. It was a growing mountain of evidence. In the meantime, I started documenting everything: photos, dates, conversations, even ambient noise recordings from their late-night board meetings that they sometimes held near the community center, loud enough for me to hear from my porch. I didn't want to miss a single detail. The deeper we dug, the more twisted it got. We discovered that one of the HOA board members worked for the very contractor who hauled away my timber, a clear conflict of interest. Another member was part of a local conservation group that had been pushing for the HOA to take environmental ownership of surrounding rural lots. This wasn't just an overreach, it was a coordinated effort. They thought if they shouted loud enough and acted confident enough, no one would question them, but now they had to deal with legal scrutiny. And the courtroom was coming fast. What made this whole situation even worse was how the HOA tried to control the narrative. They sent letters to local residents claiming I had confessed to taking logs that didn't belong to me, which was a complete fabrication. They even cited a fictional phone call in one of their reports where I allegedly admitted wrongdoing. I never had that conversation. I never confessed. They just made it up. And then, unbelievably, they started to hold public meetings with legal counsel present. At these meetings, which were recorded, they reiterated their false accusations, warned homeowners to keep an eye out for suspicious land activity, and essentially branded me a criminal in front of an audience. That was the final straw. My lawyer added slander and libel to our growing countersuit. The HOA's own public words would be used against them. Their confidence had blinded them to the fact that they were creating evidence we would soon show in court. We also found out that a few residents had begun to record HOA board meetings themselves. One woman, who had grown suspicious of the board's tactics after they tried to fine her for her mailbox color, sent us recordings where board members joked about putting the logger in his place. Another recording captured a board member saying, "He won't be able to afford this by the time we're done." It was chilling, but at the same time, validating. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining the hostility. This was real, coordinated, malicious. One of the most disturbing revelations came from public records. We discovered that the HOA president had been involved in multiple lawsuits in other communities. He had a history of overreach, of pushing boundaries until homeowners broke down or moved out. He had done this before, and gotten away with it. Not this time. My lawyer compiled everything into a formal complaint. We were no longer just defending ourselves. We were suing for real damages. Lost timber, legal costs, emotional distress, defamation, the works. And as court dates began to get closer, the HOA's tone started to shift. They tried sending one last letter, a half-hearted compromise, where they offered to drop the accusations if I agreed not to pursue legal action. We didn't even dignify it with a response. They had built this mess brick by brick. Now they were going to sit in the middle of it and answer for everything. The legal battle was just beginning. But for the first time, I felt like I had momentum on my side. The facts were clear. The documents were airtight. The lies were catching up to them. They had tried to paint me as a thief, but soon the truth would speak louder than any smear campaign they could dream up. Once we decided to take the HOA to court, it was all about preparation. Every shred of evidence mattered. My lawyer and I knew this wasn't going to be a quick win. The HOA had resources, they had their own attorneys, they had local influence. But we had something they didn't: the truth. Step 1 was documentation. We organized everything into a legal binder: emails, letters, photos, maps, satellite images, forestry plans, even witness statements from neighbors who had seen the HOA's contractor trucks near my property. We printed and time-stamped everything. We even hired an independent surveyor to remap my land using GPS and drone imagery. The results were identical to the original deed. The logs were harvested from within my property line. No question. The HOA's Greenbelt claim was fiction. Step 2 was timeline. We built a calendar of every interaction, from the first HOA complaint about my shed to the day the logs disappeared. Every note, every meeting, every accusation. It was all laid out to show how deliberate their escalation had been. Then we focused on motive. We discovered internal HOA emails, obtained during pre-trial discovery, showing that they had discussed alternative funding options for new landscaping and fencing. One board member even suggested that unused timber in adjacent lots might help with cost reduction. That email was dated just 2 weeks before the logs were taken. It was damning. We also found out that the contractor they used to remove my timber had previously bid on an HOA beautification project and been rejected due to cost. But after the recovery of my logs, they were suddenly back in business with the HOA. We subpoenaed financial records and discovered payment transfers within days of the timber's disappearance. That's when we knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was theft. We even brought in a forestry expert to estimate the value of the stolen wood. He appraised it at $38,000 based on type, condition, and market demand. That gave us hard numbers, financial damages we could prove. My lawyer crafted a compelling argument: trespass, conversion, a legal term for theft of property, defamation, and malicious prosecution. The HOA had crossed every line. We filed the suit and waited for the court date. Meanwhile, the HOA tried everything to delay proceedings. They filed motions to dismiss, requested extensions, claimed jurisdictional errors. All of it got shot down. The judge saw right through it. And while they stalled, our case got stronger. I gave a deposition, calm, detailed, honest. The HOA board members gave theirs too. And cracks started to show. One claimed the logs were partially on HOA land, then admitted he had never seen the property boundaries himself. Another said the community greenbelt included all surrounding nature, even if it was privately owned. It was absurd, but that absurdity worked in our favor. We also called in neighbors to testify, people who had lived there for years, who knew my land, and had watched the HOA grow more aggressive. One neighbor recalled seeing the contractor's truck drive in before dawn. Another testified that she had seen board members walking through my woods the week before the logs vanished. Even more shocking, a whistleblower. An anonymous tip came to my lawyer's office in the form of a typed letter. No name, no return address. But inside was a printed screenshot of a group chat between HOA board members. In the chat, they joked about the timber. One line read, "Well, looks like we just got ourselves a new park bench set." Another said, "He's bluffing with the lawsuit, we'll settle for cheap." It was a smoking gun. The judge allowed it into evidence. The chat proved intent, malicious, premeditated, and coordinated. And it killed the HOA's narrative. During our final case-building meetings, My lawyer looked at me and said, "We don't just have a case, we have them cornered." By that point, local media had picked up on the case. A few community blogs and regional outlets ran headlines like "Landowner Fights HOA Over Stolen Timber" and "Homeowners Association Faces Lawsuit for Alleged Land Theft." Public opinion began to shift. I started receiving emails from strangers, people who had their own HOA horror stories, people offering to testify, or simply thanking me for standing up. One person even wrote, "You're fighting for all of us? Give 'em hell." We included a full damages breakdown in our filing. $38,000 in lost timber value, $4,700 in equipment and contractor replacement. $11,000 in legal fees to date, $25,000 in punitive damages for defamation and reputational harm. Total claim, $78,700. And we weren't bluffing. We had evidence for every cent. The final stage of case building was strategy. We practiced every line of testimony, prepared for every angle the HOA might try. We anticipated them claiming community misunderstanding, or land management responsibility, or even overlooked jurisdiction. But we had them locked in. Too many emails, too many financial records, too many lies. As the court date drew near, I remember thinking, I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to live in peace. But if I had to be the one who stood up to them, so be it. We were ready. The day of the trial finally arrived. I walked into the courthouse with a folder in hand, wearing a plain shirt and jeans, nothing flashy. I didn't want to come off like someone looking for a payout. I wanted the truth to be seen. My lawyer was calm but sharp, flipping through our notes like a surgeon prepping for an operation. The courtroom itself wasn't huge. It had that slightly worn feel: polished wood, faded carpet, fluorescent lights. But for me, it felt like a battlefield. The HOA showed up in full force: 3 board members, a pair of attorneys, and one of their contractor buddies who had helped haul the logs. They walked in confident, almost smug, like this was just another neighborhood complaint hearing. That smugness didn't last. From the moment the proceedings began, the tone was set. The judge, a sharp woman with a reputation for no-nonsense rulings, wasn't here for posturing. She wanted facts, and that played right into our hand. My lawyer opened with a crystal-clear statement. This wasn't a neighborly dispute. This was theft, trespassing, defamation, and a coordinated attempt to rewrite legal boundaries for financial gain. We laid out the timeline, showed maps, brought out permits, walked the court through photos of the property, the harvest process, the logs themselves, and the space where they had vanished. Then came the surveyor. He testified with precision, explained the zoning codes, boundary lines, and GPS data, pointed directly to where the logs were and where they ended up. The HOA's green belt didn't even touch my land. Then came the bombshell: the contractor's payment records. We showed the invoice, the transfer, the date, just 2 days after the logs were taken. Their contractor was paid nearly $8,000, double what it would have cost to remove junk trees. The judge raised an eyebrow. You could feel the shift in the room. The HOA's defense was weak. They tried to say they were acting in the interest of the community, that they believed the logs were abandoned, that they thought I was squatting on HOA-owned land. Then my lawyer read the email, the one where a board member joked about building benches from the logs. Game over. Their credibility cracked on the spot. I testified next. I told my story. Plain, honest, firm. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just explained what happened. The judge nodded, took notes, watched me closely. Then came the HOA board member's testimony. It was a train wreck. He contradicted himself twice, said he thought my shed was on common property, but admitted he never saw the survey, claimed they had verbal reports of illegal activity, but couldn't name a single person who gave one. My lawyer shredded their statements one by one. Then we brought up the group chat, the screenshots. The judge looked at them for a long time, then asked one of the board members, "Did you write this?" He froze, stuttered, finally said, "Yes." It was brutal. The cross-examination continued for over an hour. By the end, the HOA looked like exactly what they were, a group of bullies who thought no one would stand up to them. And then the judge recessed to deliberate. Those minutes felt like hours. I remember sitting there, staring at the floor, thinking of everything I had lost. The logs, the time, the stress, the people who stopped talking to me, the moments I questioned if I had done the right thing by standing up. But when the judge came back, she didn't hesitate. She looked directly at the HOA's table and said, "You acted without legal basis, without jurisdiction, and with clear intent to intimidate and profit." Then she turned to me. "This court finds in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. We won. Damages were awarded. Every dollar we asked for, the HOA was ordered to pay restitution, legal fees, and issue a public written apology. It was over, but not without consequences." After the ruling, I walked out of the courthouse and just stood there. Not smiling, not cheering, just breathing. I hadn't realized how much tension I had carried, until it finally lifted. Over the next few weeks, things changed. Some neighbors reached out, apologized for not believing me. Others were still silent. But I didn't care. I hadn't fought to win back their approval. I fought for what was right. The local paper ran a follow-up. Judge sides with landowner in timber theft case. It was surreal seeing my name in print. Not as a villain, but as someone who stood up and won. The HOA leadership changed not long after. Several board members resigned. A new board was elected with a promise to stay in their lane. Fewer rules, less overreach, more transparency. I didn't attend the meetings. I didn't want to be part of their world. I had my land, my peace, and now, my vindication. The courtroom had done what it was supposed to, delivered justice. They thought they could push me around, that I'd back down, that no one would believe me, or that I wouldn't fight. But I did fight, and I made sure they'd never forget what happened when they crossed the line. While the judge's ruling was the legal climax, the real turning point happened weeks before the final verdict, when we exposed just how deep the HOA's lies ran. It started during discovery. As part of the pre-trial process, both sides had to hand over documents and communications relevant to the case. We expected some emails, maybe minutes from board meetings, but what we got was a goldmine. The HOA had carelessly included entire threads of internal communications, hundreds of emails, notes, memos, everything from HOA gossip to high-level planning. My lawyer and I stayed up 3 nights in a row combing through them, and what we found blew the case wide open. One email thread between the board members showed a clear intent to reclassify neighboring rural land as part of the community greenbelt, a move they knew was illegal. One message said, "If we adjust the boundaries internally, no one will challenge it." Another replied, "Just get the logs first. Legal can catch up later." That single sentence changed everything. We now had documented intent to deceive. They weren't just wrong. They knew they were wrong. And they did it anyway. Worse yet, they discussed planting survey markers on my land to confuse inspectors. One board member mentioned dropping red flags where we think the HOA line should be. It was pure manipulation. Another revelation? They had contacted the buyer I had lined up for the logs before I ever mentioned the harvest publicly. The buyer confirmed someone representing the HOA had tried to negotiate a sale, using photos of my timber stacks. That crossed into fraud. We amended our complaint to include new counts: conspiracy to defraud, attempted sale of stolen property, and willful obstruction of property rights. The evidence wasn't just useful, it was explosive. The judge was given early access to these documents, and during one pretrial conference she said plainly, "This is no longer a case of overreach. This is a pattern of deliberate deception." From that point on, the mood changed. The HOA's lawyers became quieter. The board members stopped posturing. They were scrambling. Public pressure also mounted. An anonymous leak, likely from someone inside the HOA, sent the worst of the emails to a local watchdog group. The group published excerpts under the headline, "Leaked HOA Emails Reveal Plot to Seize Private Land." The post went viral within the community. Suddenly, everyone was talking, not just about my case, but about HOA abuse in general. And people started coming forward. One elderly couple said they were fined $500 for building a wheelchair ramp without board approval. A single mother had been threatened with foreclosure over a missing mailbox flag. A veteran was given a citation for flying a flag without HOA-compliant mounting. The stories poured in. It wasn't just me anymore. It was all of us. Media attention grew. A regional news station picked up the story. Then national coverage followed. Small-town HOA sued for timber theft and land fraud. A legal blog interviewed me. I even got a request from a podcast that focused on real estate abuse and housing corruption. What had started as a nightmare had become a movement. Behind the scenes, we kept digging. One HOA board member had used a fake name in certain communications to distance himself from legal liability. Another had falsified a public record request. We discovered he had altered timestamps before submitting emails to the court. My attorney issued another set of filings: obstruction, forgery, contempt. At this point, even their own legal team seemed unsure of what to do. During a settlement meeting, their lead counsel floated the idea of mediation, hoping to negotiate damages down quietly. We declined. We wanted it public, on record. We weren't going to let them hide behind bureaucracy. The more exposure the case got, the more support poured in. My legal fund, which I had set up just in case, grew overnight. Former HOA members from other communities offered to testify on similar tactics they'd experienced under the same leadership. The narrative had flipped completely. I was no longer the angry landowner fighting City Hall. I was the guy standing up against systemic HOA corruption. In the final weeks before trial, the HOA's internal structure began to crack. One board member resigned, another stopped showing up to court entirely. At a hearing, the judge reprimanded them for lack of cooperation and deliberate delays. Their credibility had been shattered from the inside out. That final stretch before court felt surreal. We knew we had everything: the truth, the documentation, the public behind us. And yet, the weight of the past year lingered. The anxiety, the nights I couldn't sleep, the fear that it could all go wrong. But I kept reminding myself, we weren't just reacting anymore. We were in control. And the more people learned the truth, through leaked emails, witness accounts, public backlash, the more the lies lost their power. This was the moment the tide turned. Not because of one big speech or dramatic courtroom explosion, but because of receipts, cold, hard evidence, their own arrogance printed in their own words. We didn't just win a legal battle. We told the real story. And in doing that, we changed everything. Not just for me, but for every neighbor who ever felt bullied into silence, every homeowner too scared to speak up, every family who thought fighting an HOA was pointless. We made the truth louder than their power. The moment the judge read her verdict, everything went quiet. It didn't feel real at first. I heard the words, "In favor of the plaintiff on all counts." But it took a few seconds to sink in. My lawyer turned to me and smiled. I just sat there, still, breathing. Then came the numbers. The court awarded me full restitution for the stolen timber, $38,000, full reimbursement for legal costs, punitive damages for defamation, total judgment, $78,700, exactly what we asked for. No reductions, no compromises. But the money wasn't what made it feel real. It was the statement from the bench. The judge called the HOA's actions deliberate, coercive, and rooted in entitlement. She said the board had knowingly acted outside the bounds of their authority and attempted to weaponize community trust to disguise criminal intent. That statement, on record, meant more to me than the payout ever could. As we left the courthouse, a few reporters were waiting. I gave one short quote. This wasn't just about trees. This was about standing up for what's yours. Then I walked away. I didn't want to turn it into a circus. I just wanted peace. Back home, everything felt different, lighter, like I could breathe again. The logs were gone. I'd never get them back. But what I regained was far more important. My name, my reputation, and my sense of ownership over what was always mine. The community responded, too. Some neighbors who had stayed quiet during the ordeal came up to me in town. They said they were sorry, that they hadn't known the whole story. A few asked if I'd run for a position on the new HOA board. I politely declined. I had no interest in joining the system I'd just beaten. I wanted nothing more to do with that world. But I was glad to see it changing. The old board members resigned within a week of the verdict. One was even reportedly being investigated for misuse of HOA funds. A new board was formed, with actual oversight and accountability measures. Local ordinances were amended. A new clause was added, clarifying that HOA boundaries must be publicly available and verified by county records. Another clause made it illegal for an HOA to pursue punitive fines or property actions without third-party mediation. The case had ripple effects. I received emails from people all across the country who heard the story. Landowners, veterans, retirees, people fed up with being bullied on land they paid for. They thanked me, shared their own stories. Some asked for legal advice, which I couldn't give. But I connected them with my attorney. That sense of solidarity was unexpected and powerful. It gave the whole ordeal a new meaning. I hadn't just stood up for myself. I had helped shed light on a system that desperately needed reform. I never imagined a personal dispute would end up changing policies, inspiring people, or exposing corruption. But that's exactly what happened. A local university reached out to ask if I'd speak at a civic leadership class. A small real estate group invited me to join a roundtable on homeowners' rights. I even got a call from a nonprofit working to establish a national database of HOA abuses and overreach. They wanted to feature my story. I declined most of the offers. I didn't want to turn it into a platform. But I did share advice where I could, quietly. Through emails, calls, and private chats, people just wanted to know they weren't alone. And that's what I gave them. Proof that it's possible to win. Not easily, not quickly, but absolutely possible. Every now and then I walk past the spot where the logs were once stacked. It's empty now, just grass and dirt. But I don't see loss anymore. I see victory. I see resolve. I see a reminder of what happens when you don't back down. The HOA thought they could steal from me, lie about it, and bully me into silence. Instead, they gave me a purpose. I didn't ask for this fight, but I finished it. And if I had to do it again, I would. Because in the end, justice isn't about what's easy, it's about what's right. If there's one thing I learned from this entire experience, it's that silence is dangerous. HOAs, like a lot of small organizations with power, rely on people staying quiet. They thrive on people assuming it's not worth the trouble to push back. They assume you'll fold, that you'll be intimidated by a legal letterhead, or a threat, or some made-up policy they throw at you. And most people do fold, not because they're weak, but because life is already hard enough. Who wants to add a lawsuit to the mix? But if I hadn't stood up, if I had let them take what they wanted, they wouldn't have stopped. They'd have done it to the next guy, and the next, until the lie became the law. So I fought, not because I wanted a courtroom, not because I wanted the spotlight, but because I couldn't let them rewrite the rules and get away with it. The biggest lesson? Documentation is power. I didn't win this case with emotion or speeches. I won it with maps, emails, time-stamped photos, permits, receipts, a calendar full of dates and facts. If you're dealing with any kind of abuse of power, start documenting yesterday. The more you write down, the less they can twist the truth. Second, the system works, but only if you push it. The judge in my case did the right thing. The legal process worked, but it took months of effort, money, and stress to get there. And it easily could have gone the other way if we hadn't been thorough. Justice isn't guaranteed. You have to chase it. Third, don't underestimate how many people are quietly on your side. At first, it felt like I was all alone. People avoided me. Some believed the HOA's lies. But once the truth came out, once the facts were undeniable, everything changed. People supported me. They spoke up. They showed up. They thanked me. You never know who's watching, and you never know who needs to see you stand up so they know it's possible. Fourth, it's okay to be scared. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't. I had nights where I lay awake wondering if I was making a mistake, if I was ruining my life, if I was gambling everything over a stack of logs and a principle. But courage isn't about feeling fearless. It's about pushing forward in spite of the fear. Even in the darkest moments, the unknown, the threats, the humiliation, I kept going. And that's what made the difference. Finally, and maybe most importantly, own your space, whether it's a piece of land, a one-bedroom apartment, or a tiny corner of the world that you call yours. Protect it, respect it, stand up for it. Because the moment you let someone else tell you what's yours, you've already lost more than property. You've lost freedom, and that's worth defending at all costs. This whole journey changed me. It didn't make me rich. It didn't make me famous. But it made me stronger, more aware, more grounded in who I am and what I value. It reminded me that we don't have to accept injustice just because it's packaged in bureaucracy. That power only works when people are afraid to challenge it. And that sometimes the best thing you can do is be the one voice that says no when everyone else stays quiet. I hope this story empowers someone, even just one person, to speak up, to protect what's theirs, and to know that they are not alone. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt powerless against an HOA, a landlord, or any system that tried to control what's yours, then do me a favor. Share this video. Share it with your friends, your family, that neighbor who's getting fined for painting their fence the wrong color, because stories like this need to be heard. Not just for justice, but to remind people that they're not alone. Drop a comment below if you've had your own run-in with an HOA or dealt with something similar. I read every comment, and I'd love to hear your experience. Let's make this a space where people can share, vent, connect, and maybe even learn how to stand up for themselves. You never know who your story might help. If you're in the middle of something right now, here's my advice. Start documenting, take photos, save every email, keep a written log, talk to your neighbors, ask questions, find out what's legal and what's just intimidation. Even if it feels small, keep the records. When the time comes, they'll matter more than you know. And if you made it this far into the video, seriously, thank you. This has been one of the hardest chapters of my life, but knowing someone like you stuck around to hear it makes all the difference. If just one person out there finds the strength to speak up because of this story, then it was worth it. If you haven't already, hit that like button. It really helps more people find this video, and subscribe if you want more real stories about standing up, pushing back, and protecting what's yours. This channel is all about truth, justice, and reminding everyday people that their voice still counts, and that sometimes even one voice can shake the system. Thanks for watching. Stay strong, stay free, and I'll see you in the next one.